Hello and welcome. It's Monday, so no. I don't know what we're doing here. I don't start these things normally.
Yeah, and no one gave you permission to, so I don't know what.
You edit, so just take me out. It's fine. I don't expect to be in the video anyways. I've been here for every one of the GM KSAs, and come to find out, you have muted and cut me for years now. This is an outrage. So why I'm not in the second campaign, y'all. Exactly. Welcome to Khyber Shards.
Insist on being for everything.
It used to be a 5th edition actual play YouTube show set in the Eberron campaign setting, and this was our GM Philip. We're done now. We just did the full cast KSA, and there were so many questions for Philip. As a GM, he's gonna get his own episode here, and this seemed like a cool opportunity that selfishly for me to get to be a part of learning some of these answers, because I've only sat at one table, and Phillips is one of my favorite brains, and so I'm interested to see how it functions in these things, and also so you don't have to just talk by yourself for an hour.
I do appreciate that part.
How you feeling now that we're so far removed? This is the last Khyber Shards activity.
I know. I was thinking about that. Like, this is the last video, at least that we can foresee, that we will introduce as welcome to Khyber Shards or something like that. It just, that's weird. That's a weird place to be in. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about the way things concluded, and I'm allowing myself to starting to get jazzed about what's next. I did some work. I did my first real serious work for the next campaign this afternoon. So yeah, it's good.
Including a teaser here on the channel, which is very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know the setting of Philip's next campaign. I can't wait to watch. I'm not letting this bit go. Well, let's get into these questions from our viewers here.
Yeah.
We start with Laura. Please info dump anything you had about Demise that we didn't learn.
I would be happy to. There really just isn't a lot. Demise was an Irani elf. She was a multi-classed necromancer and artificer. I suppose I'm saying was, but you guys did undo that timeline, so
I will kill her a third time. We come back for a one shot.
She's a multi-class necromancer artificer. She has always been a devotee of the blood of Vol, and is one of the very few seekers who is aware of the existence of Arandis Vol. I mean, she's a really devoted agent of Lady Vol. That's really what it was. There, I didn't write a really detailed backstory. I had motivations for her. Motivations were that she is eager to prove herself worthy of more than she has done so far. And that was the main source of her antagonism towards Ezri, is that Ezri, by virtue of the accident of his mark, was instantly more valuable to Arandis Vol than Demise was. And then it happened again with Ari, who was once again suddenly immediately more valuable than Demise was. And so her source of antagonism was sort of the sense that the player characters that had relationships with Lady Vol just kind of stumbled into them. And she has put in the work. So that's Yeah, that's not a huge amount of info dump to give, but that's just kind of what I had written about her.
Yeah, she's just got to get good. That's all. The next question. What's Solarka's husband and children like? And we know what her husband's like, to be honest.
Right.
How long did she wait for Pog? Was Hular sad that Pog disappeared?
I mean, I'm going to work my way backwards in this. Yeah, of course, Hular was sad that Pog disappeared in the same way that many people were. But what Hular had to deal with in that timeline was more urgent than these friends of ours are gone. Like a lot more immediate problems were there. And so, um, sure, Hular was sad both because Pog was a friend and a good ally, and also because Solarka was sad. But that it's not like he was pining. That was not the height of priority. Um, how long did Solarka wait for Pog? I don't know. Um, some amount of time, but Pog not returning probably indicated death. So.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no way she could have predicted that we would have gone forward and messed up. Like, if I come back was always the promise.
Right. And since he was going back in time, there's no like way to logic your way to that. And so, yeah, there'd be no reason to assume anything but death. And then what is Solarka's husband and children like? I never worked up a bunch of details on these characters because I felt extremely confident that we weren't going to meet them on screen. But he was a half giant, so and so were their children. So that's pretty much it. I don't have a personality for this character.
Good. He's nothing to me. Did the dwarf that Carl had to fire during the Boggle incident ever get her job back?
Of course. Yeah. Once Carl started to bring in more money again and could start rehiring his staff. Of course, Carl would rehire his staff that he had to let go before bringing in new people. That's just good business.
Tommel remembered Ari through. I was debating on whether or not I even just read the Tommel question or do I just troll straight through it. Tommel remembered Ari through his curse. And Laura alone thinks that's a sign of a deeper bond. What do you think?
I will be very honest here. I think it's a sign that telling your GM the quirk about my character is nobody remembers him is a really hard thing as a GM to keep in the front of your mind every time you bring in a character.
I would imagine.
If you go back and watch through, you will notice a lot of people remember Ari on really quite light acquaintance as well. And this is because about, to be generous to myself, 40% of the time, I just could not keep track of the fact that everyone was supposed to forget who Ari was. It was really challenging. It was a great idea. I loved the idea. I was really bad at, ironically, remembering it. So I didn't do that on purpose. I'm sorry. I didn't do that on purpose. And I don't have a good way to like reverse engineer some lore to explain it. Saying that they had a really deep connection from Tommel's perspective would be in defiance of things that were said on screen. Obviously, Ari's connection to Tommel was stronger than Tommel's connection to Ari in the way that a younger person's connection to a cool older person who shows an interest in them is usually stronger going one way. Like that one older kid at your high school who was cool to you when you were in 3rd grade, you felt really strongly towards that kid in a way that they probably didn't towards you. My school does a thing where they have a pen pal program where we pair up fifth graders with high schoolers, and they give them little composition notebooks, and they write letters back and forth to each other throughout the year.
Cutest thing I've
It's
ever heard.
great. And it's absolutely the case that the fifth graders feel a much stronger connection to the high schooler than the high schooler does to the fifth grader in most cases. So, yes, there was a significant connection, but the depth part of it was definitely one way. And so that does not work as an explanation for Tommel. The unfortunate explanation for Tommel is boring and mundane in that I had a hard time remembering to forget Ari.
So is Tommel. It's fine. They also ask, since spoiler happened in Eberron Renewed's campaign 2, that means Vor exists in this world. What do you think he's like here? Probably a daredevil who hates toast.
Just because Eric in the podcast he GMs introduced a multiverse or a multiple timelines thing doesn't necessarily mean that my GM's game ascribes to the same theory of time. It could, but it doesn't ascribe to that. But it does not mean it does. We have not stated whether the timeline that they went and that they visited still exists, or if they've created a branching. Secondly, even if we did accept the multiple universes theory, it would not necessarily mean that Vor exists in this world. Beric wouldn't have to exist in this world. There's nothing that says that Uric and Eladrin and Eladrin ever met in this timeline, if this is a timeline in the shared multiverse of Eberron Renewed. So, no, not necessarily. Uric doesn't ever have to have met Lord Irtalin. Vor doesn't ever have to have been born. Beric doesn't ever have to have been born. None of those characters have to exist just because it's a shared universe. The number of things that had to come that had to occur to bring any couple together to produce a specific child are numerous. So I don't think it means that.
Well, there we go.
There you go.
We are on the Laughing Tree Inn. We are not in Pantheon right here.
If Vor existed in this world, Vor's dullness would be a canon event in such a multiverse. Any version of Vor would be living the dullest possible incarnation of that life.
Thorough. Next up, we have questions from Darren. Philip, did you have plans to feature any of the other Dragon Mark houses that you didn't end up having a chance to use in this campaign?
I absolutely did. Obviously, the arc involving Pog's father would have involved House Deneth pretty heavily. And House Deneth has a substantial presence in Stormreach, and we really just did not get to mess with that. One thing that I kind of wanted to do that I just never found a place to add yet another villainous scheme. Like, there were enough villainous schemes going on. There's a whole subplot section in the Stormreach book about the Tower of Kol Koran, which is the headquarters, the office building for all the dragon marked houses, and it's run by House Kandaric, and they rent office space to all of the other houses that operate in Stormreach rather than the houses all having their own individual enclaves, with a couple of exceptions like Thorani and Shadows. And the thing is, there's something sinister about the Tower of Kol Koran. Like, the shape of it isn't right for when you go inside the offices, the shape of the offices imply that like the tower is like hollow inside. So something is there, and there's a bunch of different proposed ideas for what's there in the Stormreach book, whether they're like tunneling down under the city to reach something, or there's a demon lord bound under the Tower of Kol Koran, or it's a doomsday device, or any number of what's-its. But yeah, it's that was one, and what House Kandaric is up to there was definitely of interest to me. Just a second, I gotta switch headsets. Went to all the trouble to get this thing connected, and then the battery died. Um, and then uh, I crammed this into the Rubble Warriors because I never found a good way. One of the wonderful villains of Stormreach is Colin Delirindar, who's the head of House Lyrandar in Stormreach. And the reason he's the head of House Lyrandar in Stormreach is everybody else in the house, because House Lyrandar's base is on the northern end of the Corvair continent. And so this is as far away from the center of House Lyrandar's power as you can get. And the reason he's there is everybody in the house thinks he's crazy. He calls himself the Kraken. He's a part of this cult called the Stormfront that worship the Fury and believe that really powerful members of House Lyrandar, when they die, metamorphose into Krakens.
What?
So he's absolutely nuts, and he's definitely set up to be a supervillain, like to be a Doctor Doom kind of supervillain. And again, I had already selected a villain for this campaign by that point, but I really like Kalindon de Kenneth, Delirandar as a villain, and would love to use him as the villain of a campaign someday. And so I crammed him in because I thought it would be really hilarious to put like the most powerful sorcerer in Stormreach in a room and have him foiled by a bunch of meddling kids. Like that
Really
seemed incredibly funny. So yes, that's those would be the ones that I wanted to use, but I didn't get a chance to.
Darren also asks, did you have plans for any other elements, events, characters from the X-Men comics that you didn't end up having a chance to use in the campaign?
I really wanted to do Sentinels. And I kind of hinted at Sentinels, but we never really got to do it in a big way.
Right.
I just couldn't quite get. I didn't want it to just be, this is a giant automaton. I didn't want it to just be exactly Sentinels, and so I kind of finessed around what the Sentinels were like, but we didn't really get to do it in a big way. And then I really wanted to include. I had an idea to include Nightcrawler as a. If we had spent more time at the Church of the Silver Flame, like if that had been a bigger part of not just Pog's story, I did have this notion of having one of the priests there be aberrant marked and do the whole Nightcrawler thing, have him as a tiefling and all of that.
Awesome.
But I tried to resist the urge to just exactly port X-Men characters in. Like Thora is fulfilling the role of Xavier, but I didn't give her Xavier's power sets. Dane is sort of in the role of Magneto, but I didn't give him Magneto. Like, so that was, I tried to avoid just copy pasting, but I do really love Nightcrawler, and so that was one that was in my notes that I never got to really do. But yeah, that and some kind of Sentinels attack the mall episode would have been a lot of fun.
Oh, that would have been awesome. And now questions from Emily. Did you ever intend for Dane to be possessed by someone from the War of the Mark like his Thorn of Breland equivalent was?
I didn't. What Emily's referencing here is the character of Dane originates as a character in a couple of different novel series by Keith Baker. The second one of which is called the Thorn of Breland trilogy, about a secret agent of Breland who works for the King's Citadel, like Thora did. And one of the characters in there that runs House Tarkanan, that's taken over House Tarkanan from Thora to Veen in that series, is Dane. But their relationship with him and Thora in that series is very different. It's not exactly clear. how it came to be. And so I wanted to kind of represent that split, play with that character. But no, I didn't want to. I didn't want to just copy the way that he's done in Baker's novel, and I didn't want him to be. Uh, I wanted to bring his power down because I didn't want to set him up as the villain of the campaign. I wanted to set him up to be an ally of the characters. And in Thorn of Brelin, he's not exactly a villain, but I wanted to make him my own. So no, I never intended to do the War of the Mark possession thing.
Why did Lucan and Mina steal the vampire's blade from the Breelish embassy?
So Lucan took charge of the sword from the Strike Force after they recovered it very successfully. Or sorry, no, after the Strike Force did the distraction, Lucan went and stole the thing from the Emerald Claw, and in that process, he got charmed by the intelligence in the sword, and so he was not in his right mind when he went and stole it. He was being compelled by the the intelligence that's in the sword. And Mina did it because her older brother, who she loves, was clearly in trouble and asked her for help. And he probably lied to her a whole bunch very successfully because he was a spy, and spies are usually good at that.
What happened to Puzzle Dust when Arandis killed the Forgotten Prince and became the Forgotten Queen?
Would you like to know?
I'm pretty sure they would.
I have some thoughts about that I don't necessarily want to use up right now.
Oh. Watch Puzzle Dust be the recurring character between the Laughing Tree stories. What was up with Forge? End of question. Were they a precursor to House Cannon's attempt to weaponize the Retrievers, but instead of being infused with the power of Thora's mark, Forge developed their own mark? Would it have been possible for a regular Warforged to develop an aberrant mark, or was Forge truly special in that regard?
Forge was built by Cardane. Forge was one of the Warforged that were built by Cardane. So in the temple place that you guys found Cardane, there were a bunch of automata that looked a lot like Forge, but rougher versions of that. And those were early drafts, essentially, of what Cardane eventually created in Forge, which was an automata with true intelligence. And part of that creation involved Kulsir, and this created the possibility for Forge to have an aberrant mark. Forge ended up in a Cannith warehouse because House Cannith found Forge in one of their expeditions into the jungles of Zendrick, and intended to take them back and study them to try and figure out why they had an aberrant mark and also what was special about them. So yeah, the Strike Force really rescued Forge from a very unfortunate end as in a Cannith lab somewhere. But yeah, Forge was created by Cardane and is thousands of years old. Wow. But had been essentially inactive for a very, very long time before being dug up by House Cannith.
Around episode 39, Thora mentioned that the manor usually came in from the jungle, but this time it came from the sea. Why was that? And for that matter, why did it move around so much in general compared to regular floating islands? And what was up with the rumors of it being cursed?
Again, I'm going to work backwards. It was rumored to be cursed because it was an old mansion in which a sorcerer of some kind once lived. And, those just have a tendency to collect rumors of being cursed. Also, as I mentioned in the player KSA, the spirit of that sorcerer was haunting the house, trying very hard to drive insane anyone who visited by sharing the horrible secret that he had discovered.
Fortunately, our shared IQ was low enough. I really helped bring that law of averages down for us.
So in that sense, it was at least haunted. It moved around because Orlando designed it to basically. Orlando had taken a piece of floating island and had constructed a way of piloting it from place to place in order to allow him to travel around for his experiments and researches that eventually caused him to learn a terrible, terrible secret that destroyed him. So that's why it was able to move around so much. And when he died, the magic was just sort of left active, and so it was moving itself. It was moving itself around in that way. And as to why it came in from the sea, my intention was, and I don't remember how well I phrased this, and I didn't have time to go back and watch these episodes, but my intention was to express that what was happening was because it was coming in from that direction, it was going to be easier to like get aboard it while it was present before it drifted off again. Like the direction made it come into a place that was going to make it more accessible, whereas normally it would have been much harder to get to. So it created an opportunity. And as to why that was, I honestly didn't create a reason. It was because that made it more accessible. And so something about Orlando's haywire magic. Normally it was coming in from somewhere out in the land, not always from the same direction. But on this particular occasion, it seemed to be drifting in from seaward. So the engines were just firing in random directions, and it happened to bring it in at an elevation and from a direction that it was easier to get to this time.
Convenient for us. Exploring Eberron states that Arenal's upper spellcasting limit is 7th level, and Regenerate is a 7th level spell. Was Arenal never this powerful in your Eberron, or did they lose the knowledge of how to do so when Arandis took over?
I probably view the upper level of Arenal as likely being more, not less than 7th level. So no. The Areni would still have the ability. A high level Areni wizard would still have the ability to cast Regenerate after Arandis took over, plus a whole bunch of other terrible spells that Arandis would be able to teach the Areni again.
Well, in that case, if Arenal is ruled by the reborn queen is still this powerful, then why didn't anyone cast Regenerate on Demise, since she was still understandably upset over the loss of her arm 20 years later? They then clarify, for the record, out of universe, I really appreciate that Demise kept her skeletal prosthetic instead of someone restoring her to being fully able-bodied. Just trying to figure out why she kept it in universe.
It's badass.
Fair.
Is the answer.
The full stop. Yep.
Yeah. To be clear, Demise isn't exactly mad that her arm is now a skeletal arm. She probably thinks that's awesome.
Yeah.
She's mad that she got thrown off a lightning rail, resulting in the terrible, terrible mangling of her arm.
But that was also badass.
She doesn't see it that way.
Well, empathy, right. Demise. Look from other people's perspectives. Okay.
Yeah. So the skeletal arm was a silver lining to what happened, not the problem. The thing that she was mad about and wanted vengeance for was the throwing off the train and causing her to lose the arm. If at some point in her life she had gotten the opportunity to replace her arm with an awesome skeletal prosthesis and had some reason to, she'd probably be fine with that. But no, she wouldn't want to. She wouldn't want to get rid of it. Like it's a part of her, and she really likes it. And there's probably some really cool story as to whose arm it originally was. As to whose arm bones she's got as a prosthesis. So no, that was part of who she was from that point on, and she wouldn't have wanted to turn back the clock on her transformation, her continued growth and evolution. But that doesn't mean she wasn't going to still seek vengeance when opportunities arose. I mean, she wasn't hunting them, but when opportunities arose, if she could find a way to get them killed or kill them, she was down for that.
Rude.
And that was her demise in the Age of Kolsir, because she could have cast Power Word Kill at the beginning of the fight, but playing with her food, man.
Boy, am I glad she did. Yeesh. Will campaign 2 take place in the same continuity as Khyber Shards?
I have been going back and forth on this, and I probably should consult the players before saying yes, it will.
Well, if yes, will people need to listen to Khyber Shards before campaign 2?
No. No, I don't intend it to be like a sequel. But it will take place. It will not restart in 998. Will be in 999 or 1000 or something like that. So it will take place in the same continuity, and that means that some things that have happened in Khyber Shards may be referenced, but where we've chosen to set the second campaign, more on that later. Where we've chosen to set the second campaign is not Stormreach, and once the timeline had been restored, the events were really quite localized to Stormreach. So there's not really a whole lot of ripple effect to what's happened. So it won't be necessary, even if occasionally things might be referenced. Characters could show up, but again, most of the characters that we met in Stormreach were localized and important to Stormreach. So if characters show up in the next campaign from the first campaign, it shouldn't impede anyone's ability to follow that story. It will be an entirely different story. It's not Khyber Shards 2.
On a similar note, are there any plans to bring campaign 2 to other platforms, specifically thinking about podcasting platforms?
I am looking at putting it on Spotify, because I can still upload it as video on Spotify. Mm-hmm. I will be honest, I do not have the time to dedicate to uploading it, to getting all of the things set up to upload everything. Also, things like Podbean that you use often for podcasting are substantially more expensive when we're talking about video. And I really do think we're better in visual. And so I don't want to just upload it as a purely audio format. Now, if I upload it as a video on Spotify and you watch it on Spotify, it'll work with your screen, turn it off. So absolutely nothing stops anyone from only listening. But I don't want to edit a second version of it that's just the audio and upload that. So I will probably be adding it to Spotify in campaign 2, as well as YouTube. I'm looking at some other options, but those are the two, and that's where most of the people I know listen to their podcasts anyway. So it seems like that's a pretty safe addition. So yes is the answer to that, but I will probably not be able to say available wherever you listen to your podcasts, that sort of thing, because that's a lengthy process and kind of expensive.
You're not wrong. Philip, during episode 39 at about 5718, you said that the fountains in front of Greymalkin Manor's entrance had a conjuration spell cast upon them. But Esri didn't pass the Arcana check to know which spell. What was it?
I'd love this to be like a super cool thing, but it's just produce water. They were... There wasn't a water source to them. They were just enchanted to pour water. instead of having to have plumbing.
Fair enough. What is the bottomless pit in the Grey Malkin basement actually bottomless? If not, where does it lead?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Boy, that was the most misleading smirk from you. Oh, I was about to be so intrigued, man.
I don't know the answer to that question.
We should be audio only so people don't have to suffer through that moment.
Insofar as you have the whole Schrodinger's cat thing going on with it, the only safe thing to do is to assume that it is in fact bottomless.
I feel like I do hate that more than it having some terrifying conclusion. Back when Ari first made his pitch for becoming Stormlord, Thora was worried the established Stormlords would kill him. What changed?
Essentially, Thora's view of becoming a Stormlord, as she started the process of doing that, caused her to she began to realize that, as she kind of talks about this in the finale, in the epilogue, that in order to do that, she would have to become who she was. She would have to become who she was. She would have to become as cutthroat as she was, and that was her point in the discussion in her in her discussion with Ari the first time. Was Ari was not ready for this. Ari was not ready to become who he would have to become. And what changed is Thora decided she wasn't willing to become that person again. And that it didn't need to be and shouldn't be her job to choose who Ari became. If Ari was going to end up becoming a manipulative politician like Selshadra or like anyone else, if Ari was going to have to become cynical and jaded and all these things in order to do the thing that Ari wanted to do, it wasn't really Thora's job or right to protect him from that. And so, having concluded that she knew who she would have to become to be a Storm Lord and was not willing to become that, she decided that it was not necessarily true. It did not necessarily follow that she knew who Ari would have to become.
Is she more confident in his ability to survive as a politician despite the loss of warlock abilities? Or does she think the surviving Stormlords are grateful enough that they won't try to pull anything for a long enough time that Ari will be able to learn some survival instincts?
Honestly, neither of those is really the thing. It really is just that Thora's not going to try to micromanage who Ari becomes. She's not going to try to protect Ari from, if she probably still thinks the odds are not necessarily in Ari's favor for long-term survival and success as a Stormlord. And a year later, Ari is at least beating those odds. And so Thora's perspective, it really is simply, I don't want to be who I would need to become. It's not my job to tell Ari or Shade or Pog who they need to become. That's their job. They're grown-ups.
When the strike force came back from the Cannith turned Cardane facility, Thora's office looked like someone had gone through it. Was it entirely a case of Thora doing some emergency cleaning as she tried to figure out a way to pick up the pieces, or was that hinting at something else?
That was Thora had come home really angry and thrown everything around her office
Mm.
in just an absolute loss of control. And there was no point in keeping all of the things on her desk. That was just shit. That was to hell with everything. Is what that was.
What happened to Cardane and Harazi? Because the last time we saw both of them, they were hanging out in the jungle so they could think. By the time of the wedding, had either of them gotten in contact with Ari, Shade, and Pog?
Cardane didn't. It never became necessary since vengeance was taken on Colseer in other means. And so Cardane didn't. And Ari, Shade, and Pog have no idea what became of Cardane. In terms of Harazi had lived in various states of hiding for a really long time with a small group of Kitsune around her. And I think freed of the fear of Colseer showing up. Freed her from feeling like she had to just stay in one place and hide. And so I suspect that she's decided that she's left Shaetirias Talai and is seeing the world for herself instead of just hearing about it through agents like Arj.
She got a happy ending at the end of that, too. What was
Yeah.
the rune-carved wood that Merrick's gave to Pog to give to Forge when the Strike Force returned to the present?
It was a schema, um, an artificing pattern, essentially.
The end. Was it an attempt to get the Merricks of 999 to work with Forge instead of against, and the Children of Khyber, or something else?
It's something else. Um, it's something quite a lot more drastic than that.
Cryptic as ever. You mentioned that you had picked secrets for the Stormlords. What secrets did you pick for each Stormlord?
Yeah, so for those curious, so this book includes a sidebar that proposes a set of secrets for the Stormlords, but doesn't give which Stormlord goes with which one. And so the intention is you can use all of these or none of these, like most things with the Stormlords, or with Stormreach in general. You really can't use all of them. But so basically, one of them is a murderer who's run away and hiding, essentially, as a murderer. And the Dark Lanterns are very much eager to kidnap this Stormlord and bring them back to justice. One of them is an orphan from House Cannith, who has the Mark of Making, but is keeping that a secret. One of them is supposed to be a Rakshasa, a servant of one of the demonic overlords. One of them is secretly a devotee of the blood of Vol. And one of them is actually an agent of the Dreaming Dark, a Quarry spy, which would have been a really cool thing to play with Esri, but never got a chance to. My secrets that I would have used if I had gone on with this. I intended that Um, Jonas Wilkes was the Rakshasa.
Oh, yep.
That Varen Lassite was the Quarry spy.
Mm.
That Kira Selshadra was the Blood of Vol seeker. That Yorick Aminatu was a murderer and was I had a for a while I had a plot where this got revealed through Lucan, and the this became another avenue for taking down Yorick.
Mm.
But Lucan was obviously lost from the story in the whole Vampire Blade thing. But that would have been a potential thing that could have gone down if that arc had gone differently. And then I intended it's the obvious one, but I intended Omarin to be secretly marked with the mark of making, which is why she's been so effective running the forge.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Did Thora ever have a chance of becoming a Stormlord, or did you decide from the start, at least from the point that Ari told her he wanted the position, that she would eventually decide it wasn't for her?
No, I absolutely had it at that point that Thora would become a Stormlord. And it was really in the course of investigating into House Cannith and the seeker drones and that kind of thing. Um, it was really in there that I started to really think about Thora's motivations and what she would do. But Thora abandoning the idea really wasn't intended as a way to let Ari do it. That came about in the conversation with Eric as we were preparing for the epilogue. That was not actually initially Eric's pitch. I just said to Eric, so Thora would not take that job at this point. And so if that is actually something you want for Ari, because when Eric pitched that, it wasn't exactly that Eric didn't want that for Ari, but Eric also knew that there's no way Ari successfully does that at that point in the story. It wasn't like Eric so much as this is Ari would think of it this way, though. Ari would see himself as ready. So no, it wasn't always the plan for Ari to become a Stormlord. In the epilogue, it really was the plan for Thora to. But as things got revealed and I started thinking about what Thora's reactions to these things would be, I realized that it made far more sense in that character that she would reject it, that she would give up on it, because the Stormlords were not treating in good faith.
Did the kids ever figure out that Arlo and the groundskeeper who kept making them haul grass clippings were the same person?
I think Cadric suspects. I think there's probably a substantial support staff at the school that are just Arlo. And the kids don't know this yet. But I think Cadric has become suspicious, and that there is now probably an ongoing quest to try and figure out where all the support staff live, because they can't seem to account for them. Kara seems likely to figure it out, but not likely to tell the other kids.
Valid. Did the lightning rail itself cut Demise's arm off, or did she need to have it amputated later?
So lightning rails don't have wheels, so being thrown off the lightning rail, even if you ended up somehow under the lightning rail, wouldn't, like, you're not literally being run over. So my intention was essentially that her arm was probably caught in the lightning and the electrical discharge of the lightning rail as it goes by, and badly burnt and probably broken in the fall. It just mangled badly enough that by the time she managed to get picked up by the Emerald Claw, she decided to just that it had to be done this way instead. because that was more to her liking as well. So no, it was just badly mangled in the fall and by the lightning of the actual lightning rail, to the point of beyond the point of normal magical repair.
Is River the daughter of the Forest Queen?
She is not.
The end. On the way to the Cannith facility, Demise refused to tell Ari or the others when she had arrived in Stormreach. Will you tell us now?
She'd been there for weeks listening to their communications and considering when her opportunity would arrive to kill them. But there were standing orders to avoid endangering Esri, and there were standing orders to stay off the island. And so opportunities hadn't arisen.
Were you notating to yourself that she was listening in whenever we use the communicator?
Oh, yeah.
I hate it. I hate it so much. How did Mina come to lead the Titans?
She's real smart. The Titans are presented in the Stormreach book as not really, they don't have their own turf. They don't really have their own like racket. They're muscle, and they're almost more like a goon squad union.
I want that to be a punk rock name. So
Goon Squad
bad.
Union. Yeah.
That's awesome.
They negotiate collectively to ensure that the rates for hired muscle for the other gangs stays what they accept. But mechanically, ogres and hill giants aren't very bright, and so often get taken advantage of and often get cheated in this process, and are endangering, but doing the most dangerous jobs in the various turf wars of Stormreach. And so Mina saw this and motivated by two things. One, Mina's not a bad person. She genuinely doesn't like seeing these people being taken, these guys being taken advantage of by the other gangs. And two, by her desire to acquire enough power to either find a way to get her brother back or find a way to get back at the people who put her in this situation in the first place. She befriended some of them and began to point out to them that they weren't being treated very fairly by the others. And so in a sense, Mina starts doing the thinking for the Titans. And that is of great value to the Titans. And so they start doing what she has in mind, and taking the jobs that she thinks are good jobs for them to take, jobs that aren't going to get them killed, and jobs that are going to pay well. And so Mina becomes Mina's a great benefit to the Titans, and has her own plans for what to do with them.
How far would future Ilya and future Kadric have had to flee to be safe from the time bomb if they had wanted to stay in the past?
I don't know. I didn't set, I mean, the radius was enough that it wasn't going to be relevant to a battle map. But you'd probably not want to be within a mile of it when it went off.
That seems fair. Were there any effects from the time bomb on present Kadric and present Ilya?
Both of them experienced a really intense sense of deja vu for about 3 seconds and then moved on with their day.
Which at that age would not have been noticeable. Would anything have happened to present Soren if the strike force had brought his zombified corpse back with them?
No, corpse wouldn't do it. I mean, trauma, surely.
It wouldn't have been a great day.
Right. It'd be a bad day. Nightmares for a long time. But not in the sense of some sort of chronal disassembly or something like that.
When did Soren and Mirren start working together?
Mirren and Soren started working together not very long after Mirren got to Stormreach. Mirren would have heard about Soren from Tommel and the other aberrant marked members of the Stormhammers. There was an aberrant marked gang in Stormreach. Or there was there had been an aberrant marked gang in Stormreach before, and she used her connection to Soren to displace them when she arrived in Stormreach, by essentially selling them out to Stormreach or to Soren in terms of where their bases were, where their turf was, and allowing him to send people to collect them, and that cleared the way for the Stormhammers to establish themselves in Cross and that area.
Would Mirren's skull admitting to working with the houses have caused any trouble for Blackwheel?
So my question, probably, sure. But the problem with that theory is, why would Mirren's skull ever admit that? The thing about Speak with Dead is that the creature has the memories up to its point of death. And so Mirren's skull knows how she died and knows who killed her, and would have absolutely no motivation to tell the truth or to admit anything. And there's not really any way to force a dead person to do so.
On that line, the most recently asked question, was listening to Mirren's skull reveal her and Colseer's plans enough to convince Tommel that he was in the wrong for following them? Or is he still a who thinks he was on the right side?
Unfortunately, there's absolutely no way that Ari could force Mirren's skull to admit it. Now, is there some creative use or combination of magics by which Ari could use the skull as evidence? Probably, yeah. I mean, powerful magic will do a lot of things. Ari's magic is less powerful now, but it's not powerful. We never really explored Kara's abilities, but Kara's magic marked ability had a lot to do with like reading the history of objects. If you could convince Tommel that Kara's reliable, then it might serve as a useful point of evidence. Again, though, Tommel, as far as that would go, Tommel's motivation, Tommel would feel betrayed by Mirren, and it would certainly shake him in a substantial way, but it wouldn't fundamentally change how he sees the conflict between aberrants and non-aberrants. And so he would absolutely still believe that he was right, but that Mirren had betrayed the movement, and had not been the ally that he thought she was, and thus that Colseer had not been the ally. So it would certainly have turned him off on the whole Colseer thing. He would still absolutely think he was right about the goal, but he would realize that Colseer had not. So it might temper him some, in that he would recognize that he had been wrong to trust either Mirren or Colseer, and being wrong about another person that substantially will obviously shake your faith in your ability to discern who's trustworthy and who's not. But it wouldn't change what he thought the solution was for making aberrants safe. And so he's still very much got the capacity to be a radical, a terrorist, a Magneto style villain. He's just going to realize that apocalypse was not the way.
So still a complete and total and just through and through until the end, right?
Yes.
Got
If
it.
you could, and again, all of that is if you could convince him of what your claim was, which would not be easy, but possible.
Not worth it. He's at 1040 of KSA 52, you said that you originally had a totally different, catastrophic thing, as opposed to stealing Ari, planned if the Strike Force rescued River. But you didn't want to tell us in case the Strike Force returned to Thalanis. What was it?
My intention was that pulling River back to the mansion would essentially pull the mansion and Thalanis together. And so bringing River
Whoa.
back would bring the Feywild into the mansion and create all sorts of insane havoc there. But it turned out there was a really convenient need to remove Eric from the game for a little while, so stealing Ari made a lot more sense.
There was a Karnathi knight present when Arandis killed the Forgotten Prince. Was this Caius 1, Caius 3, or someone else?
Those are all interesting guesses.
I know when to move on. We've talked on recordings long enough. I know when there's not going to answer y'all. What happened to the Palace of Forgotten Things when Arandis became the reborn queen? Did she break the Feywild by leaving?
The simple answer to this is yes. Arandis, once she no longer needed to be the reborn queen, stopped being the reborn queen. She used the Feywild for what it was useful for, and having done so, abandoned the role and wasn't especially concerned with the consequences for the Feywild because that wasn't the realm she was interested in.
Where and what was Arandis's phylactery?
I will not tell you.
Did Mirabella succeed in making the White Raven into a Stormlord in the Age of Colseer?
No. Not in the Age of Colseer. In the Age of Colseer, the White Raven was killed in the sacking of Stormreach. Mirabella escaped, but the White Raven did not.
Would Colseer have held up his end of the bargain if Shade had been handed in?
Certainly from his perspective. Remember that the end result was still yes, he would have backed off. Like he absolutely would have upheld what he said he would do. Does that mean he wouldn't still find a way to take dominion over the whole region? No, absolutely he would have. But he also wouldn't have needed to so much, because if he could have gotten the drop on Harazi more successfully, then he could have had a time machine, and that would have made things substantially simpler. Or at least that's his perspective on it. Obviously, he's done that a bunch of times, and it hasn't worked out. But, if at first it don't succeed,
shooters gotta shoot.
Keep going. The definition of genius is attempting the same thing over and over again, right? That's what it is.
You're quoting wrong, but still quoting. Philip, during the train fight, Demise supposedly had a cool line she was going to say to Ezri and Shade, but she got confused and couldn't say it. Now, you were asked about this for KSA 95. Sweet God, how many KSAs do we have? But at 2257, oh my Lord. But at 2257, you said you didn't want to reveal it in case you brought her back. What was the line?
Okay, so I dug through all of my notes on all the places where I've written anything down, and tragically, I could not find what I wrote down. Maybe I didn't write it down, I guess. The essence of it was going to be essentially the statement being to Ezri, particularly, that this is what an actual necromancer looks like something to that the effect. It was to do with her
That would've
sense
worked.
of Esri as being um just a lucky person, just someone who happened to accidentally stumble into some necromantic abilities without actually understanding them. And so it was something along that. It was better than that, but it was something along those lines. But tragically, I cannot find if I ever wrote it down where I wrote it down. Look through all my good notebooks. Sorry,
You're a phony.
I know.
No, that's what she was gonna say. You're a phony.
Yeah, that's definitely what it was.
If Thora and Dane had ever come to blows, who would have won that fight? And to be clear, I'm glad Thora patched things up before they got that far, but after Blackbriar, I was so sure their relationship would get worse before it would have a chance to get better.
It would. I thought about this a lot. I didn't stat them out and run a test fight. I think it just depends a lot on the circumstances of the fight. I think if Thora gets the drop on Dane, that does it. If it comes to face trading blows, Dane is going to have substantial advantage because that's much more what his skill level is. Thora is going to be much more focused on attempting to get the drop on Dane and take him down before it ever comes to that, using soul knives or her psionic abilities. But yeah, that's my run-in is if Thora gets to set the terms of the engagement, she wins. If Dane gets to set the terms of the engagement, he wins.
I feel like it's the Brad Pitt and Angelina fight from Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
It's completely equal depending on what room they're in.
Right. Yeah.
That's the way that goes for me. And I genuinely mean that with respect because that's an awesome fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last question is also our first question. We are back on the practical show side of things. Philip, how long of a break will there be between Khyber Shards and whatever is next?
So our plan is currently, and that's important for me to say, because this plan is largely based on life circumstances that are still in flux. Eric's in a play right now. It's the beginning of September when we're recording this. Eric's in a play right now, and he is pretty much unavailable for the next few weeks. After which, him and Sari are doing a cool thing, going on a trip, and we'll make them unavailable. So we will not be starting recording this month. If all things go well, we will probably start recording things in October and start releasing things sometime in November. So that would be my current estimation, would be starting to release things come November for campaign 2. But speaking of campaign 2, I can offer a small teaser of what there is to come right now. Ta-da!
Can I play in this game, Philip? Please let me play in this. There's a trailer.
Fine.
I'll talk to Eric and Casey and
work it out with Eric.
I will pay them.
Figure it out with Eric.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the meantime, the channel will still have content. I'm going to try to post something weekly about campaign prep, about some of the things that I've been working on, some of the systems and house rules. We're still settling. I know the next obvious question is what system we'll be using. The answer is we will not be using Dungeons and Dragons, because I'm sick of WotC, or Hasbro, or whichever delineation of that you want to make. But we will be using something 5e adjacent because I like 5e and I understand it and I run it well. So there are a whole lot of 5e adjacent systems right now. Tales of the Valiant, Nimble 5e, various others. If you are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, you will have no trouble whatsoever following the mechanics of the next game. That is the promise that I can make to you. But what the name on the tin will be, we're still in the late stages of deciding. So that's where that is. But yeah, so hopefully over the next few weeks, you'll get to follow some of the campaign prep stuff that I'm doing. And then ideally, come November, we'll be able to start dropping some episodes as we wrap out the year with Blades and Banners.
Very cool. I just want to play because of the name.
Yeah, it's good.
To be honest. Well, that's a wrap on Khyber Shards. It's
Ta-da!
It's fully over. We did an entire thing here.
It's true. We did.
That's the end, and now y'all know the game plan. I'm not gonna steal the final Khyber Shard sign off. Philip, end us out here, man.
Thank you all, immensely, hugely, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you all.
Mm-hmm.
This was enormously fun, and very, very few D&D campaigns come to a genuine, satisfying conclusion, especially long ones. And so getting to complete that whole thing and bring it to a conclusion that I'm really proud of and the players are really proud of and that I hope you really enjoyed was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for the support that the channel has received. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can still do so at all of the various social media below, including on our Discord. The merch store is still there. You'll be able to find links to Colin's Twitch. Sorry, BTR. The O is a 0, as well as to the I Never Got Into That podcast, where you can hear me and Colin talking fandoms.
Mm-hmm.
And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.